All right, thanks everyone for joining. This meeting is the CI team split AMA. Today is September 17th. I'll just set a little bit of context here. There's an agenda, add your questions. We have a ton of questions already. But the kind of like the high level context is, as we've been working as a CI team for several months now, the team is getting large. We have competing concerns. And so, one of the hopes out of this, the split is to try to provide more focus in terms of the work the engineers are doing, but then also to be able to optimize for the priorities from product, because it's hard to have competing kind of product metrics that we're trying to work towards in a single group. So that's kind of the background context section. I put the sections on the two groups in there and the various feature areas. And so we'll just jump down into the discussion. And the first item is for me, and I decided to kick this off. It would be great to get product perspective on each of these teams and some color on the vision and roadmaps. So I think, Dove, you have the first one in there if you want to go through that.
Yeah, I can go through that. So hi everyone. So regarding our overall roadmap, you can actually go and read all of this in our handbook, and I link the page to the handbook. But just to recap, I'm sure we won't have the time to read it now, but go read it afterward. Pipeline authoring team main goal is to improve the authoring user experience. And I would say that it's also aligned directly with one of our performance indicators that we measure on product, which is time to first green build. I'm mentioning that because it's really important, super critical that both the goals of the product and goals of the team are aligned. This will make our work more focused. It's based on my experience, on my past experience. When engineers and product, if they have like conflict of interest, it can be a distraction to the team. So it's really good to see that both product and the team and engineers see things eye to eye in this team. In terms of the focus of the team, I know that on the handbook, it is mentioned the priority, but it is not a prioritized list. It's just like something that we created this morning that we believe is the main focus, that we will work on that, and it won't be in this order. So to start with, making sure it's easier to start with different kinds of pipelines, for instance, like a mobile application, improving the way our templating, documentation, and more. The second one is improving the linter and the integration with the editor. We have this issue where we are debating whether we go with the web IDE or the editor Lite. This is exactly what the team is looking for as we proceed to our next to our roadmap. So once we'll get settled on that, we'll work closely on how we'll integrate better with this editor. Obviously, give smart feedback, errors, and warnings to our users, all in helping them to reduce the learning curve and helping them to get their first pipeline green. And the third one is implementing the pipeline visual builder. This is to help our user experience. I foresee that this will be one of the primary features we'll be focused on throughout this year. And so I'll have to say that this is something that's very similar that myself and Nadia, the UX designer, work on the APM team. So we have some experience on how to build something similar. And lastly is the improvement of the keyword on our CI YAML file. So we want to make it easier, but flexible for our users to configure it. So we added some examples in the handbook, like adding additional rules, keywords such as needs and metrics. So obviously all of those improvements to the CI YAML file is a part of this thing. And yeah, as I mentioned, go to the handbook, read through that. And obviously if you have more questions, feel free to ping myself or Jason, or just ask a question in the team channel. Back to you, Tom.
I'll just jump in real quick and just add on to that. Thanks, Dove, for, I think getting all that information in the handbook is super useful. And I just wanted to kind of underline for people what Dove said about the time to first green pipeline. being a really key metric, and I think a really key way to understand like why is the split happening. That obviously everybody knows here there's a lot going on in CI, and it's very, very important to the company. There's actually data that shows that if people's CI usage increases, then they tend to upgrade and become long-term customers. If the CI usage stays flat and decreases, then they tend to churn out. So, there's even
Some you became mute first.
That was, I don't know how that happened there. I muted. Could someone tell me when I muted? I was like, hold on, why is everybody quiet and listening to me if I'm muted? I was just, I think, trying to underline how important Verify is to kind of the customer adoption journey, and that the more people use CI, the more likely they are to become ultimate customers. Whereas if that stays flat, they tend to churn out. And so it's this really key adoption metric, and that for time to first green build, obviously is very important to that experience. And so, I think I haven't been as close to the team, obviously, but I think in the past, it's been hard to prioritize, juggle both of those things. And this, with Dove and his experience coming from APM, and Nadia as well, we are able to really focus on prioritizing that. So just wanted to underline that before we move on.
Hey, Darby, do we want to give folks a chance to ask Dove any clarification question on his overview, or we want to do that all at the end?
Yeah, I think if anyone has any immediate questions, we can do those. I want to make sure we get through everything, but I don't want to lose stuff in the threads because I know there's a lot going on. So does anyone have anything that they would like clarification on, or any additional questions for Dove?
I've got one on point number one, making it easier to get started with more kinds of pipelines, e.g. the mobile app. Can you go a little bit more into detail what you mean by the mobile app?
Oh, you're muted, Dove.
Yeah, we linked it on the handbook, but it's more like providing more examples with our templating capabilities around different mobile application, different data pipeline configuration, and stuff like that. I know it is possible today, but we likely want to improve the documentation and the templates that we provide to our users.
So this is providing templates for people who are making mobile apps, not providing a mobile app for people who want to make templates, right?
No, it's mobile app development builds, so it's not like.
Yeah, we're not building a mobile app, is what.
Not as I'm aware of.
I think you're right, Sam.
That's how it could be read, I guess. I just wanted to make that clear.
Yeah. Yeah, no, the distinction you made, I think, is right, Sam. Any other questions for Dove? By the way, hats off to Dove and Jason for getting the 3-year vision written overnight. They put like tremendous pressure on me because I don't have that out there yet, but I'll work on that this week. Okay, so for CI, the easy way you can think about this is the way these two groups are being divided is based not just on the product perspective, but on the user's perspective, right? It's pipeline authoring is a subset of what was CI, which is the distinct activity that the user would need to start with first and be successful with before it opens up everything in CI. And so CI is everything after they've authored, whether first-time users of the pipeline authoring or a really advanced user that's going into a lot of rules and bridge pipeline configurations. Once all of that is in place, then the rest of what happens at the interaction with pipeline is under CI. So what I did here was just really briefly touch on the things that are the 3 areas that I want to focus on that is going to find its way into my 3-year vision update to my direction page. So what's written there is CI is about interacting with and running already interacting with pipelines that have run or have already, the details of after they've ran. Someone put those notes there. I wasn't quite sure what the rest of that means as far as performance execution up to the runner. The three areas I want to focus on for CI team is improving the interaction with pipeline. I try to list out the feature labels of the issues that would be relevant to that. So making it easier to set configurations for running a pipeline. So that has everything to do with setting and managing variables, permissions, and the part of merge requests that is behavior impacted by our CI settings, because we know the source code team is generally responsible for merge requests, but there are things that we do in CI that impacts that merge request behavior, and we would own that work as far as making it easier to run a pipeline. And then there are things that happen after a pipeline has ran, and when I want to make it easier to access or manage those things, some of those things being artifacts, the pipeline graph. There is we could debate the label there for CI graphs and analytics. There's a question that Fred has later under the discussion. But when I was trying to carve out some distinct areas within the label CI interactions, which had over 1,000 issues, I saw that there were some recurring themes about wanting to see analytics and wanting to see certain things in the graph that make them understand what's happening. So I lumped it under this one label, and it's probably something we need to examine if that's the correct labeling. The second area that I want to focus on with the CI team is providing features for analyzing our pipeline performance. There is a group of persona that I don't think we have given the tools and features for them to look at pipeline from an overall perspective of how it's doing. It would be the engineering manager of a team, or even director of engineering, that would want to see the patterns and the places where pipelines can be optimized. So they would want to look at data on job durations, failure rates, any data about a pipeline has ran. Those are features that I think we can also target for example, an ultimate tier, which I don't think we currently have a lot of CI features in ultimate or paid CI features. So I want to drive some of that through this area of focus. And then the third thing that I think is assumed under both teams, but I did want to call it out, is I really want to make a concerted effort to address those issues that are impacting usability of our existing feature. I want to make more emphasis on fixing those bugs, addressing those tech debt that make our existing features either not usable or not usable at all, or reduces usage because it's just problematic and there's too many workarounds that our users have to make in order to use the existing features. I think UX debt and UI polish also lends itself to making existing features more usable. And I know the recent change of direction that product org was given, or product managers were given, is to prioritize usability over new features even. And so I wanted to call out this area of focus. Any questions for me? We can go into the discussions questions at the bottom, but any clarification that I can make for you for what I have there?
Yes, I have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, I wanted to talk about which metrics would you consider important for this site, as similar to the time to first screen build in authoring, which would be the metrics that you would chase for users of the CI side?
I think we have an issue, Dove, that Jason opened, that is to instrument how we would measure time to first green build. I don't know the status of that one. Is that Miguel?
I think the
I'm not
question
sure.
is what would be the analog in CI? Sorry, Miguel, to jump in, but if time to green build is important in pipeline authoring, what is important in CI in terms of a metric?
Oh, so that's a really good question. I haven't been able to think through, because one of the things that we have for the stage metric, which is unique users triggering a pipeline. So that's one of the metrics that we're tracking is it easy for a user to trigger, that I would want to work on are the things that I'm working on make it easier for users to trigger a pipeline? Because if authoring is about making a pipeline exist, the rest of the interaction is, I'll give you a clear example, Miguel. One of the issues that is planned for 13.5 is to pre-fill the run pipeline form with the variables from the YAML file. That would make it easier to trigger the pipeline. And so that would fall under interaction, because there's an existing pipeline. It's hard to trigger it because there's so many variables you have to manually enter, but that issue would address that. And that's in 13.5. That's a good example. I don't have the metrics thought out on how we would measure it.
Okay, thanks.
The question I was going to ask, I was just wondering, so on, let's see, B2, provide features for analysts of pipeline performance and patterns, example data on job duration and failure rates. I was kind of wondering, like, so what's like product's idea for that? Is that to like maybe have like a separate view that users can like view granular data? Is that like a personal dashboard for them? Or is this still like kind of up in the air on what like product's idea for this is?
It's just an idea right now. I'm going to need to work with our product designer to get help on what would be the best way to present that kind of information. I would like to surface that data for the individual user, but also I could see for someone who is in a leadership role wanting to see it in a dashboard across multiple projects. So we don't really have the design for the solution for that yet, Peyton. I don't think that's an area that we've invested in that I'm aware of in the past. And so it's kind of greenfield for me right now.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you. I think that's a really interesting point for CI.
Hey, Miguel, by the way, I'm going to find in the agenda notes there where I'm highlighting the unique user string pipeline. There is already a performance indicator for that, and I'll find that handbook page and link to it. So I'll turn that into a link. You could look at that. That is a metric that we're measuring now. Any other questions that I can clarify on what the focus is for CI? If not, I think we can move on to the next agenda item.
Cool. I'll take that one. And I know we're getting close to the scheduled time. I think we can just go over because we have a pretty long agenda here. And if folks need to drop, this is being recorded. And I'm happy to follow up with anyone after this meeting today if anyone wants to chat about anything. My schedule is fairly open. So point 2 on here, it was a comment from Jason. He was interested in the sort of technical analysis that we did on the team split. And I linked a bunch of things in here that I'd kind of worked on over the last few months. And to provide a little bit of a backstory to some people who are maybe new to the team or just weren't aware of this. A few months ago, CI was one bucket. We put all of our issues into one category label or one group label, and that count was 3,500 or something like that, and that was bugs and features, and it became clear that we needed to get a bit more granular with it. So the first item I linked here was first pass at doing this. So we just kind of like started bucketing things, and we sort of iterated from there. So this is kind of how we got from one area of things to more things, which is where we are today. So it's hard to take this big pile and sort of break it down. So then as we went through that, the other issues here are just around how we've been tracking technical debt and bugs. And this is sort of the focus for this, which is because, and I wrote this in here, like focusing on tech debt and bugs is important from the engineering side, because these are things that distract the team, that make it hard for us to be predictable. And so this is kind of how we looked at things, and you can kind of see the different issues or spreadsheets in there. And then there's also the stale bugs cleanup initiative that we went through, which was something that quality helped with to try to get rid of stuff that was old, because we found issues that were like, here's a bug from 4 years ago that no one's ever commented on since then. We probably don't need to keep that open and track it. So we cleaned up a bunch of stuff there too. So I think that kind of is the background there. And Jason asked for my recommendations, and based on kind of what I've seen, I think I wrote the things that I'm recommending here. First thing is optimize for the key metrics the business is focused on. Future GMAO is a thing we're talking about a lot. If you weren't able to attend the group conversation yesterday, the ops group conversation, there's some good discussion there with Sid and Kenny about this and how we think about it. And future GMAO is future group monthly active users. So we look at where we think we will see the best return on our investment in terms of feature development and focusing on this like increase of group monthly active users. This kind of goes to what Sam said, which is if we get people into CI, we know that they're more likely to continue with GitLab and use other components of GitLab. So focusing on that is sort of like the top level thing. I want our teams to organize so that we can execute independently and holistically own customer-facing features. So this whole thing that we're working on, we should be able to own the customer experience for. I think this means it's easier for product and UX to work and think about the whole thing, the whole experience for the customer, and not have to like hand off between different groups. And then where we are today is just a start. We'll learn more as we start working this way. And then I said I would optimize for moving or better defining feature areas over moving folks around teams. So I don't want people to be shifting teams. I would rather say like, we think this thing should move over here, or this thing maybe needs to be better defined. And we can do that as we get into it a little bit more. So that's kind of the recap there. Does anyone have any questions specifically related to that? Okay, Fred, I think you're up next.
I have the next 3 points. So if we want to shuffle people around also, we can. I don't want to hijack this whole meeting.
It's the Fred show.
This is the Fred CI meeting. Hi, everyone. Right, so my first question was in terms of the CI graph, which I saw was, it was kind of split in between authoring and CI, and kind of like it was starting in the category and moving to another. And to me, that makes not really a lot of sense, because well, first, the graph is a representation of your pipeline. And so making that being owned by authoring to me makes more sense, and that the CI group or interaction would use that graph and add as an extension statuses and like things that they care about. But the basic of the graph would make more sense to be owned by one group, and then one just build their extension on top of it. And if one has to own it, then it makes more sense for authoring. And I've made my whole point in the issue that I have linked in the agenda, but for this recording, I can go over quickly. And it's just like, even for a backend perspective, it would be weird that the backend of authoring owned the graph, but then the front end of interaction, like of CI, owns this graph, and then it becomes a constant cross-team collaboration. And also one big advantage of having one team own more one owning the same piece of code is better, and two, the authoring team seems more oriented toward graphical visualization, which means that you can build an expertise of people who write graphical visualization for a living, and then you don't have to split that and then collaborate all the time.
Hey, Fred, I don't think it was ever intended that in the example you just gave when you summarized your comment there, I don't think it was ever intended that if authoring team created the feature to modify your YAML file through the graphical representation, that another team would own the front end part of it. It would all be one team owning that feature. In the same way that if we're making a change to merge request behavior because a CI setting affects it, we would own that entire feature change.
Right, but the graph we're building for the YAML is going to be used in the at term, like in a couple of milestones, will be used by the CI team to show the status of the running pipeline job. And so there was talk of like, then do we transition that graph because it's in the running state, but then the core graph would be the same. And so one team has to own the core and one has to build extension for it. Otherwise we end up with two teams working on the same core, and then there can be conflict of interest.
Yeah. So by the way, that part of it, I haven't been in those discussions. I did not know that the visual representation now was going to replace the pipeline graph that exists now. So that's something I need to dive into to understand. That it's news to me.
I've been saying that like over and over and over. But I just wanted to double up on Fred's thing that it's been architected to work that way. So it's sort of under flight in that structure. So I do think this is a really good point.
Maybe we're thinking of two different things, Sarah. I know that you've been saying that the work like that was being done to visualize the DAG would eventually be built into our current standard pipeline graph view. I did not, so I understand that part, that work on the DAG will find its way there. I did not know that, and maybe we're talking about two different things. I did not connect that the YAML visualization work that Vitica designed, for example, the visualization of the static file, which is the YAML preview that Fred mentions in his comment, is going to replace the pipeline graph for when a pipeline is running. That was where the disconnect is for me.
Yes, it is doing that. No, that's just that we don't need to get totally into the details, but yes, it's doing that because we needed to rewrite the thing. And so the way to rewrite the thing while also continuing to get work done on some of the features we want to do is this method. And like, that's the way it should work, is that it should be the same graph.
And I'll just jump in there and say thanks for watching out for that kind of thing, because I think that will most likely be common in this type of split. I mean, this team has split multiple times before, many teams have, so I'm sure some of you have, experienced that. But, this is really about being able to break apart those goals and focus around time to first green versus, the rest of CI. And there's going to be lots of details where, like, then at a technical level, you probably say, oh, well, these things aren't that easy to separate maybe on those lines as, maybe it seemed from a different level. And I think that's really where we need, smart engineers, like looking at that, thinking about it. And, we can, over time, shift things around or continue to evolve things. But yeah, it's really important that we're watching for that and avoiding as much as we can cases where, in order for one team to do something, the other team has to do something, and that gets just kind of complicated to manage and usually slows things down. So that's the goal.
Did your question get answered, Fred?
Well, I mean, we talked about how we don't know, but like I think essentially, if there's no strong objection, it seems even in the comment that most people agree that it should be owned by pipeline authoring, period. And then the CI team would use that graph and like collaborate to like how they integrate with each other, but the graph should be owned by authoring and not by CI. Cool. And so I have two other points that they're kind of similar. I think I'm gonna skip the fourth and go right to the fifth because they're kind of related. And I think the fifth one makes for a better discussion. So in the term of how we did the split, there was one thing that I was curious about why we did it this way. And it's where, to me, I was expecting the split to be centered around yes, pipeline ordering versus interaction of the CI, but also a bit higher level of where pipeline ordering will also include anything that's about metadata. And the reason why I was thinking that, and Miguel, I think like summed that up pretty well in his comment, where we're targeting different user groups. So the person who will be targeted by pipeline ordering is someone who's more in DevOps or like organizational, and they're structuring their data, and they care about metadata. They care about how efficient is their pipeline, how many minutes are being run. They want to optimize that part of the user flow. And CI is more concerned about engineers and people running the pipeline. And like on my day-to-day and as an engineer, I don't need to know the average CI minutes that are being run or like all that stuff. So like to me, like one of the label, like anything that has to do with graph and analytics, like metadata, should live in the pipeline ordering group, where it's like we're targeting people who are building the structure and they need all of that higher level information. And then the CI group focus on like your daily running the pipeline. And here's what you need. What it doesn't mean you don't have access to information or statistics, but it should be more like you, like your pipeline, what's happening, how is my code running? Not like, here's the organizational information. So to me, that should move to ordering. But obviously we can have that conversation now and see if that makes sense.
Hey, Fred, on the CI graphs and analytics bucket of issues, I actually at one point had it as CI graphs and then CI analytics separately. And when I was done labeling some of the issues, they were such small buckets that I thought I made one too small. But I'm beginning to think that those are two unrelated things under that label. The analytics is not something that you're wanting to have as part of authoring, but the graphs you would. So that's one way that we can address this is I go back to splitting those out.
I'm curious though, because like analytics, it depends. Like I think maybe analytics compound multiple things as well. So maybe that's why, because for me, like even like your average number of runtime, for example, like, hey, this month on this project, you have like 500 minutes of runtime that happened. I think that should be ordering as well, because you're seeing the metadata of the project. It's the label that's confusing, because then we're talking ordering versus CI. So we're like, well, this is CI because it's a number of runtime, but I think the label are confusing. I think the pipeline ordering is more about, like, because even pipeline ordering is about metadata. It's about the structure, the architecture. So for me, it's like one is about architecture of CI and the other is about execution of CI. And I think that's where this might get confusing. But that's how I saw it, because to me, it makes sense that the team that owns the pipeline editing and the metadata, and like, we're targeting the people who are going to write the architecture of this project. And we're going to give them all the information they need. And then CI targets the engineers and the people who run the pipeline, and that needs the artifacts and all that kind of stuff.
Except that CI is intended for more than the engineers. It's also intended for personas that are outside of the team that maybe is managing and optimizing performance across projects, across groups. They would be the ones that would also, that would be a persona that we're targeting in CI to service with analytic tools and features.
But isn't that exactly what we're saying? Like, and we can drop it. I don't want to prolong that too long. But like, well, I think that the idea is that now with the split, if you want to optimize your pipeline, you're going to go edit your YAML file, right? You can't optimize your pipeline by just running the pipeline. You need to go in the YAML file and change the needs job, or change like the architecture of how your pipelines are running, or add a new job. So that falls in ordering because you're optimizing. And so that would mean that CI no longer targets the people who optimize the build. That would be ordering.
I think just because you're making use of the data you get from the analytics feature doesn't mean that you need to be the one building those features, though, that expose the analytics. An author of a pipeline, I have to think about that, yeah.
I have a clarifying question that I think is kind of embedded in Fred's, and I think is maybe the next question also, but does this split represent a split in personas? I hadn't necessarily thought that was the case. Like, are these teams targeting different users, or are they just targeting different parts of the experience for, largely the same users.
I think it's targeting the experience of how they use our, how they around just CI in general and pipeline. But there is a question later in the agenda of what is the primary personas targeted for each team. I think it's Miguel's question number.
It's basically the same question. I think it's the next question. So
okay.
that's my question too. But Miguel maybe should voice it. I keep talking over Miguel. Sorry, Miguel.
Yeah.
That's okay.
But the split wasn't.
I guess.
Yeah, the split was, to answer your question directly, the split wasn't based on persona, Sam.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I guess the reason I'm asking is because I would like to know more about what each of the teams are going to focus on. It makes it easier for me to understand what the work is going to be about if I can think of a bit more about who are the target users. So that's why I ask. But if it seems from the answers that the overlap is big enough that that's not going to be the most important factor on what each of the teams is going to do. So that's where my question was headed.
So can I make a suggestion? I think in this this sort of discussion, it could be helpful to do a follow-up with product to maybe more clearly clarify, like, I think we have a lot of user personas, and these features kind of hit all of those folks. But there's probably going to be one type that is more prominent than another, and so perhaps what we can do is go back and work to better clarify the personas and kind of the I don't know, some like maybe there's a couple issues here. Maybe there's one about personas and there's one about Fred's earlier question about the visualization and ownership, and so we could take those on as follow-ups and maybe just open issues for those or MRs to clarify that. Does that make sense to you, Tao? Does anyone else have other suggestions on how we can handle that? I think this is probably like a more in-depth conversation, and we want to make sure that we can kind of like drive to those conclusions that way without trying to kind of rush something in a sync call. Okay.
I actually have some points and suggestions later on related to say similar points, but yeah, we can go later on that.
Okay.
Yeah, I just echo. I think that makes sense, but we should not ask the question. That all this stuff should make sense. I think a key point in terms of like, how do we get excited about this? How do we really like want to work on this stuff? Is understanding the vision, understanding like why it matters. Why it's helping developers, helping people. So we probably don't have time to get to the bottom of that on every point here, but that work should continue.
Can we actually jump back to the number 4 around CI graphs and analytics? I think Peyton had a follow-up question there.
Oh yeah, thank you for making sure that got said. Yeah, so this is more of like a label thing, like that kind of ties with CI graphs and analytics. I kind of think wherever CI graphs and analytics is, CI DAG should follow the group. And even maybe we can tie that together in one label with CI graphs. I mean, the CI graphs and DAG are pretty tightly coupled, but and let's just kind of just use for like tracking purposes to see how many issues we have for DAG versus like the normal hybrid graph. I think kind of like if I haven't been working in CI for a while, like coming out and in, I would expect DAG to fall into a graph category because it is a visualization in a graph.
I agree with everything you said, Peyton. I think one thing that I would need to create a separate feature label for is included currently in that CI graphs and analytics. There's two kinds of reference of graphs. the graphs of our pipeline, and then graphs that are showing unrelated to pipeline per se. It's just showing data about CI in general. It could be anything. It could be graphs in the sense of analytics for analyzing CI.
And that could be still grouped in graphs, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that right now I have them all lumped together because it is, yeah. Now, let's say an issue for the pipeline graph showing changes that a DAG would cause would fall under CI DAG label.
Okay. So I think we can capture this as part of the follow-up. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Not that I want to cut this off. I want to make sure we get through everything. So Miranda had a point on here, if we're okay with jumping ahead. Naming is hard. Have we considered other name pairs for the two categories to make them more messy-foo? And there's a link there to what that means. We're splitting CI into authoring and CI, but those two CIs don't mean the same thing. And we have authoring category, which contains a CI authoring label, but those two autherings don't mean the same thing either. Fred, do you want to verbalize your comment? Thank you.
You're welcome.
Tao, I'm not sure if you've got any perspective on this. I think this is, this sort of thinking goes into how we come up with the naming on these things, but I don't have a lot of background on this.
Yeah, the reason why there seems to be duplication there is we came up with the CI : authoring scope label before we decided to have a separate pipeline authoring group. So now that there is a separate pipeline authoring group, you may not even need that. It now also has its own backlog, and you wouldn't need to have that CI authoring scoping label to distinguish that as a backlog for that team. Does that make sense? We probably need to just clean that up.
If I remember correctly, I think that feature area has a lot of issues in it. So it could be a case where we need to break that down a bit more granularly.
And I think also for the other one, the first one, it means that CI and pipeline authoring might be inherently bad naming. Maybe it's like pipeline authoring and pipeline interaction. I don't know, but like having one keeping CI means that one has a global name. So everything can fall in CI by default if you just think of the name, because pipeline authoring is part of CI. So it feels like CI is like the encompassing group. And then it's going to be harder to kind of just map visually like, okay, this is this group.
Is that how it's been done though with the team splits? Is that it's often that it's a team that breaks off from CI, so it's a new team and CI. So
yeah, technically that's how it's happened in the past when we did our first split. When we split from just everything to CI and then to testing, it was just like completely like out of CI at that point.
Yeah, like testing is not CI, right? Like they're not related. Like you can understand why they touch multiple areas of the platform, but pipeline authoring is just part of CI, right? It's helping you build continuous integration. So maybe in this sense, it makes little sense. I don't know. Like maybe CI has to become a group, like encompassing group, and then you have two subgroups. Like I don't know, but I think it will be confusing.
So that's kind of my question there. Like, will it be verify pipeline authoring or verify CI pipeline authoring? And then if the second one's true, does it then become verify CI?
No, it is going to be verify pipeline authoring. You can see from the direction page at the top of the agenda too. The path there is verify pipeline authoring. Yep. I hear what you're saying, Fred. Maybe part of it is also for us to get used to the idea, because I think I could see the same perspective that you're explaining was also felt when they split out testing group from CI, because you can say we really can't do testing without CI. And so I don't know that from our user perspective, CI has been a group for so long that renaming it entirely, I'd have to think about what the impact of that would be.
Well, the only option would be to have subgroups. If that's a concern, it would be CI pipeline othering and CI something else, and then that's it. Like you have, like you still have CI, but you have subdivision, and then we're different group, but we both work in CI. Just because it's true, right? We both testing is different, like I said, because they don't just work in CI anymore. They split because they had other. It's just testing in general, and they plug on CI, but they plug on other things as well. They're in merge requests, but pipeline othering, you're not going to be in merge requests. You're not going to be in other part of the application. But at this point, we can take that offline and continue the discussion somewhere else.
I think, I mean, there's a few other examples just to add a little bit of color. If you think about runner, I know split off from CI, which I'd say is probably pretty closely tied to CI. In monitor, when they split those teams, there was a health team and an APM team. So there was, you know, like monitor team. So it's happened a lot of different ways. I mean, kind of the pattern, just to be transparent, that I see here is, you know, CI is really core to the company. I mean, has been since early on. As a result, there's a lot to do there. There's a lot of, you know, people reporting bugs, people using it, people depending on it. And so you kind of end up with what maybe sometimes feels like a grab bag of like things that need worked on. I think with pipeline authoring, you know, the PMs have done a great job of kind of articulating, well, here's a subset of that can be focused on. It's important. It's really around this time to green and that authoring experience. I think CI is still, you know, verify CI is still a little bit, it's not necessarily like we have to fix it right now, but it's a little bit more nebulous, you know, like it's not as crisp, you know, we all know what CI is, but in terms of what is this group, you know, of people, like what's the kind of mission, what's the charter, you know, that it's still a little fuzzy. And I think that's being worked on, and, you know, that it might make sense at some point to say, well, it's not a CI team, it's something else, but of course, naming is hard, and, you know, and the real goal is to, you know, be able to ship valuable stuff, improve the product, not necessarily come up with the perfect team structure. But, you know, that's kind of what I think has led us to, you know, maybe this concern about that being still net.
So Fabio's been waiting patiently to bring up his comments, so I want to make sure we get to those too. So Fabio, do you want to jump in?
Yeah. So thank you. So I have some comments and suggestions at the same time. So so I noticed that the way we are splitting the team, we have in one side we have pipeline authoring and another side pipeline processing, but editing a pipeline configuration has two main side effects. One is to affect the structure of the pipeline, and one is affects the behavior of pipeline. And those happen modifying the GitLab CI YAML file. So I think that these two main categories should belong together in the same group, in my opinion, because one typical example is the DAG. So changing the DAG structure in the GitLab CI YAML has a behavior change. And so I feel by combining these two, I think it makes sense with the point that we discussed before from both Peyton and Fred, where they say the DAG, even from a graphic perspective, should belong to pipeline authoring. And I agree with that because it's both behavior and also the way we represent the pipeline structure. And I think they should be owned by a single team and not be split across the different ones. And the same would be the another point. Sorry. So something else I can't recall now, but yeah, it was mentioned before. So I did provide a link there where I didn't want to step on any toes, but I kind of try to move some labels around, some features that make sense from an engineering perspective. And and I felt, well, I came up with something interesting where we could move things together that make sense from my perspective, and those like definitely are like authoring and processing definitely they belong together. But there's some certain things that, in my opinion, they don't belong to a specific category, and like pipeline permissions. I think these are generic generic features that really depend on what kind of feature we are implementing. Is it about trying to run a pipeline, try to create, if somebody wants to edit GitLab CI YAML, it's always speaking about permission that is something that belongs to authoring. If it's something related to, I don't know, handling artifacts and permission about handling artifact, then it may be something related to the other team. So I feel there is certain things that we could do with moving the feature labels around. But this is something we could follow up offline if we have any question on that. But the other point that there was about the metrics. So the fact that we consider in pipeline authoring the main metrics to be the first time to green pipeline, time to first green pipeline. Sorry, I think that not only contains the includes the pipeline authoring, but also the pipeline processing, because we have to wait for the pipeline to finish, and that means you can optimize your pipeline in terms of DAG and etc., and that can affect also your performance of the pipeline. So I think even moving these two things together makes sense from a point of view of the main metric that we want to use. So any questions on this before I move to the next point?
I actually appreciate that explanation. It does make total sense for me for processing to be grouped with the team doing the authoring.
Yeah, so there, like the way I was thinking is we can have one team would be pipeline authoring and execution, and another team will be pipeline reporting and settings, just but which basically is anything to do with artifacts, with anything that happened before, after a pipeline is run, and even before, like you want to set up variables and settings on the CI. So those are things that I think we consider them CI interactions as well at high level. But I think this will actually make a team split that is more equal, in my opinion, and not like extracting pipeline authoring out of CI, which makes still CI the grab bag of all the bugs and issues and everything and technical debt. So I think it makes things a little bit more equal.
One thing I wanted to mention on your comment, Fabio, about the I think the permissions feature area that we have. So as we talk about like moving areas around and maybe better clarifying some of these areas, I think it's also important to keep in mind that maybe an area doesn't need to exist. Like to your point, yeah, if it's kind of a generic thing that's just implied as part of everything that we're doing, maybe that isn't a feature area, because it's just, you know, it's like air, it just exists, and we have to, and so we can totally like get rid of labels too, if that makes more sense.
Like now that we have two groups, I would get rid of the CI authoring label and the CI interaction labels, those two big buckets, because now there's two separate groups. But have you thought about statuses? Is that something that's really part of processing that should be merged in?
Yeah, exactly. So that's the other point. So I think status and processing, they're actually the same thing. I think they should be merged.
That's one thing I was thinking of doing. So after this sync, I'm going to take all of the CI status issues and move them over to CI processing, and then remove that label CI status.
Makes sense. Yeah. The other point I had was about the size of the split. So looking at the two different categories, the two different possible groups, we have on one side we have 3 times the number of issues than the pipeline pipeline authoring group. So I was wondering, are we going to allocate resources 3 times more in CI but it looks like it's 50-50 split. So at that point, my concern is like, well, it depends on what the split is going to be in the end. But if we have CI that includes solving technical debts and solving a lot of bugs, there we definitely are going to see a slower progress for their nature of this kind of issues, slower progress in that. If we're going to have less people than the counterpart pipeline authoring, then it means one team's going to perform slower than the other one. And it's going to have like accumulating a lot more issues. Also because being a grab bag of issues is going to be like that. So I was wondering how we're going to solve that.
I know that when Jason proposed these two separate groups, the goal wasn't to evenly define the group so that it would evenly distribute the issue. It was based on something that you're mentioning in your comment here about the tech debt, dividing it in a way where if even though one group may have fewer issues, the complexity of the issues would make them kind of justify having it owned by one group. Does that make sense?
I think the way that I've kind of looked at this is like with anything we do like this, it's never going to be a perfect balance of how we divide these things. But it's, if we go back to our sort of key metric in this, like future GMAL as being the top priority, that means that we're making a deliberate decision to say we're going to invest in this one group because we feel like that's the most important thing to the business, and we're going to deprioritize the investment in this other area. Like deprioritize is maybe not the right word, but like it's not going to be like, we're not going to expect the same amount of progress in this area because we've decided that like intentionally we want to put more focus here, and that means that some of these issues in the backlog, we're just going to sort of accept them and realize that we're making the choice to work on them later. So I think that's the important thing to keep in mind. I'm an engineer and I want to get rid of all the bugs and all the tech debt, but there's always the balance between that and then like what pushes the business forward and where is the where are areas for growth and what drives us to kind of the next level and to compete with our competitors effectively. I don't know, Sam, if you had anything to add to that.
I thought you two captured it pretty well. Yeah, we did. I mean, so that definitely was discussed. I mean, I personally brought up that point, and I think you can look at it in terms of spreading capacity, or you can look at it in terms of like desired investment. And I think that the thinking really from, I think, Kenny and Jason here from the product team was that these are two areas that we want to be investing in equally, have kind of a similar amount of focus. There's maybe a lot of details in terms of, like we've been discussing on this call, in terms of how does that work exactly in practice, but that's the goal here, not to have an even split. And I think it's also worth maybe pointing out here that we're not doing this because of like an engineering team structure issue. It's not like, oh, the teams are too big and so we need to split them for that reason, or there's some kind of engineering management rationale for this. It's really about aligning individuals with the product direction in these different areas. And so it really, again, goes back to those product goals much more than this is an even way to distribute issue counts. But yeah, ideally it will work out where, it makes sense to be investing equally in both those areas. And like Darby said, there may be some things that, like always can't get done, but hopefully this makes it easier to kind of focus on the important things and removes, some of the obstacles that, speed bumps we've hit in the past.
With that 50-50 team split, my next point on C2 was when do we need to figure out our preferences? I heard we're going to maybe do like a dry run in early 13.5. When exactly do we need to get that situated and let our EMs know?
Yeah, so I think what we'll do, we've got a few takeaways here that we've talked about in terms of clarifications and maybe getting a bit more refined with some of the organization. The next step would be, I think we'll just do like a Google form or something where we can put in first preference, second preference, and other sort of comments and things like that. And I think that will come. at a point where we feel like we've kind of addressed some of these things. So hopefully in the next couple of days or something, we'll have that out, and then people can put that in there. You know, like 13.5 is in progress now. It started today. So we've got our work to work on, you know, but from the product perspective, like we have 2 PMs, things are already moving down this path. So as we work towards this, we'll figure out at some point, maybe next week, you know, if things are clear to everybody, then we can make assignments, and then you know, like as you pick up work for this milestone, look for that area, realizing that things are carrying over, and we've already started. Like, I don't want to move any work in flight for anyone. Like if you started on something, we're not going to say like, oh, you got to go hand that off to someone else, because that wouldn't make any sense. So this is going to be kind of a transitional milestone. This is when we split release last year at this time. This is exactly how it worked out. You know, we had people that were working on things, and we let those things finish up because it doesn't make sense to start over. So does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Cool. All right. Jose had a question. Is it possible to get an overview of the 2 teams? Just a quick reference guide. From there, can look at the handbook and look at more in depth.
That one might have been added before all the details were added to the agenda.
So I think we've kind of,
it was,
yeah. Okay. If there's other clarifications though, for Jose, send them to me or to Tao, and we'll work to get those. Cool. So Peyton, I think we answered 11. Cheryl, you just crossed out your whole question.
I think you just answered it. It was just around the timeline.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. And then Fred, I think you got one more.
Yeah, I think it's.
Uh-oh.
He always freezes when he feels like it's actually been addressed. We've discussed, so it's probably he was about to say it's all been addressed, because that's usually when he
behavior
freezes.
for Fred.
Yeah. Like once everything is great, then his Zoom is just like, okay, enough, time for you to go, Fred.
That's an interesting feature of Zoom. They're really advancing things. Just this mind reading.
It's the Montreal experiment.
I see. Yeah, they just rolled it out in that market. That makes sense. Cool. Okay. Well, I think that's the end of the agenda. So I think if there are any other questions, we can continue to talk now. I know we've been here a while, so I want to let people, you know, get on with their day. If anyone has additional follow-ups, feel free to ping me, or your EM, or Tao or Dove too. So thanks everyone. This has been a really great discussion. Have a good rest of your day.